So we are going to start again here. So as you guys look over that PowerPoint, again, this is the FY19 Iowa VISTA Continuation Application webinar. We're going to roll as quickly as possible through this. Hopefully no additional technical issues pop up. But again, the purpose of this webinar is to provide some clear instructions for completing the VISTA application and e-grants, help applicants avoid common errors when submitting their applications, and kind of just making sure you guys understand how the continuation process works through eGrants. So again, this is going to be some general information. If you do have specific questions about your project design or how kind of things work within your project, please set up a time with your designated program officer. Again, that's myself or Vicki Hover Williamson to kind of go over your application specifically. The agenda for today is really we're going to do continuation application process overview, a quick refresher about appropriate activities for our members, some tips and tools for completing the application, resources, of course, that are available to you, and then questions throughout. So again, if you do have questions, please use the conversation box to utilize the conversation box to ask those questions. Sorry, I said that backwards. If you don't have the printed copy of the application instructions, I do encourage you to print those off so you have those available to you. So just wanted to make sure folks have that. So just a quick overview. VISTA is a national service program designed specifically to fight poverty. AmeriCorps VISTA members leverage human, financial, and material resources to increase the capacity of low-income communities across the country, specifically in Iowa, for these resources and to solve the problems independently. When VISTA members complete their service, they should be leaving behind a lasting solution to some of the country's toughest problems. So you guys are picking an issue, a community need in your area, and your VISTA members are working towards those. You want to make sure that that is something that you're building upon each year. There is more specific information about the VISTA program out on the nationalservice.gov website. In addition, for those of you who are new to VISTA, who are kind of taking over this role, this might be your first go around, there is a VISTA 101 and VISTA 201. If you guys haven't listened to those, I do encourage you to do those. They're also nice quick refreshers for any new site supervisors that you guys might be working with this year. So just making sure that you guys know where those resources are at. Just wanted to include those in there. So we are moving on to slide 5 for those of you who are following along in the email that I sent. The continuation application. So continuation applications, originally we had those set to be due on April 1st. However, due to some connectivity issues, I had my computer crash on me. It was really great. We're pushing those back a week, so 4 days. So April 5th is when those continuation applications are going to be due. The reason we have those due on April 5th is because your applications must be reviewed and approved prior to your current memorandum of agreement expiration. So your memorandum of agreement typically for most of you starts in May. Started in May of 2018, will expire in May of 2019. And so we have to have these reviewed and processed prior to that MA expiring. So just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. Again, all VISTA funds are subject to FY9 federal allocations and budget approvals. All of you are going into your continuation, so this will either be year 2 or 3. If you are in eGrants, this is a little tip. If you're in eGrants and you've created your continuation application, you're going to see that the due date says August or says September of 2019. Please ignore that date. What that is in eGrants is just a placeholder for the specific NOFA that you're applying under. Because VISTA is a rolling deadline for new sponsorships, they constantly bring in new projects year-round for the nation, and so that NOFA actually ends when kind of towards the end of the fiscal year. So that is not specific to your application, is specific to the NOFA. So I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. That is something that causes some confusion once you get into eGrants. You hit that continuation and you're like, Jancy, it says it's not due until August. And I'm like, it's actually due in April, I swear. So if you guys have questions about that, please let me know. The continuation application process. So your organization has been invited to submit a continuation request in eGrants if you choose to continue with your VISTA placements at your site beyond your current members serving. So basically, this is an opportunity for you guys to say, we had a good run and we don't want to do it, or we want to continue beyond our current members. So some folks have stepped out when it comes to continuation. They assess and they're like, man, we don't really want to move forward any further. And so we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. The applications must be submitted by the designated due date. If you guys do run into issues, please let us know. Again, myself or Vicky. eGrants does have some technology challenges, so if you do run into any issues or something pops up, please let us know if you need an extension. But we do want to try to get everybody in by April 5th if at all possible. This also is an opportunity for you guys to reassess your VISTA project and make changes or adjustments as needed. This is definitely something that we encourage every project sponsor to do annually, is to really assess your community partners, who's on board, kind of how the project is being ran, how recruitment went last year, and really look at where changes and improvements can be made. If you had a goal that it was going to take you 3 years to achieve and you achieved it in 2, that's fantastic. And so we want to make sure that you're constantly assessing your application and your project and making sure that it is reflecting the needs of the communities that you're serving, and the needs of the project, and really kind of where you're at on your performance measures as well. The good thing about the continuation application is that all your information from your previous grant will be pulled forward in eGrants. This can be good and bad. So for those of you who did not develop the first application and you read it and you're like, what is this supposed to mean? That is going to be a challenge for those of you who might be new to this. But for the most part, everything will pull forward, and so you're just going to want to update that information as you roll. If the grantee contact person has changed, make sure that's reflected in the application as well as throughout the narratives. If your number of slots is changing, make sure you have reflected that as well. If you want to kind of pull back your number of slots or expand your number of slots, this is the time to look at that, to see kind of how things are going. Keeping in mind that you want to make sure that you've been in good standing the past year. So if you want to go from, we've had 6 members on board and now we want 16, and you didn't fill those 16, you didn't fill those 6, we likely won't expand you out. So just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. We take this kind of into consideration as to how the last year went. So again, information pulls forward in your continuation. Any kind of questions about the application process in general? We're going to move on to a refresher about appropriate activities, and that's going to be on slide 7. But before we do that, application process, this is really in general information. We're going to dive into the application a little bit more later on, but just I'm going to pause for questions before we move on. Again, you can use the conversation box, or your lines are open, so you can mute and unmute your lines as you need. Any questions? Oh, Kaylee, you never received it. Of course you didn't. I will send that to you afterwards, Kaylee. I apologize. I will make sure that everybody gets that. Not sure who I sent it to then. Just a refresher for appropriate activities. So our VISTA members really look at building partnerships with local, private, and public sectors, helping develop the sponsor infrastructure, creating community events, publicizing projects. So this list is not all-encompassing, but just making sure that you remember that our VISTA members build sustainability and capacity. Their work should reflect that. The members should not be doing the same thing for 3 years. So if in year 1 it was to develop and build out tools for your volunteer project, for your volunteer recruitment and activities. And then in year 2, they're doing the same thing. That's going to raise a red flag. So you want to make sure that you're building upon what the last member did. So if the last member developed tools and a handbook, the next member should not be developing tools in a handbook. So they really should be building off of each other as you move forward. So I'm not going to read this list on slide 7, but it's just a refresher for some appropriate activities. It always seems to come up every year as people look at their continuations and ask, is that an allowable activity? Is that not? And so we try to put a few kind of the bigger ones together. On slide 8, this really kind of shows the chart of how VISTA members' activities can lead to capacity building and sustainability. And so what this does is, it's not a perfect system, and it's not all encompassing by any means, but it definitely lets you look at a few of the bigger things. So for instance, recruiting volunteers, they can do capacity building by developing forms and volunteer assignments, and then those sustainable endeavors that carry on beyond the VISTA member are the development of the handbook and those systems that they've put into place. So again, I'm not going to read this slide, but I just wanted to make sure that folks were understanding sometimes the indirect service pieces that we talk about, or the capacity building, people aren't really sure how that can lead to sustainability. And so this is kind of a nice little chart to show that. So being able to put those into perspective for folks is helpful. Just a few reminders on slide 9. What VISTA members may not do. So they cannot displace paid staff of the sponsoring organization. They can't supervise employees of the sponsoring organization or other AmeriCorps members. Again, this list is not all-encompassing, but kind of hits on the high ones. They do not do one-on-one literacy tutoring or program intake. They cannot be part of lobbying for your organization. They don't do religious proselytization. So these are some of the things that folks want to make sure that they're looking at, and making sure that folks are aware of what members cannot do. So those still, none of those have changed from years past, but it's just a nice refresher for folks to have. So we're going to move on to the application itself, and creating a continuation application and request. And so before we do that, I just wanted to make sure if we had any questions as we move through regarding kind of the do's and the don'ts. Oh, awesome, Kaylee, you got the PowerPoint. It was just slow. Great. Any additional questions? So when you guys create the continuation, I'm going to be sending you a cheat sheet. It's called eGrants Starting Your VISTA Continuation Application for FY19. This cheat sheet basically is just exactly what it is. It's a quick reference of where to go in eGrants to create a continuation applications. A lot of times eGrants, you can follow along with it fairly easy. Sometimes it's a little confusing. The one thing I will say is once you create the continuation, you're not going to go back in and keep creating it each time. It's going to be held in there as an application that needs your editing. So just making sure that you're aware of that. Continuations, again, are created in eGrants. We haven't changed that system yet. A couple years ago, in years past, there's been talk of kind of pulling away from eGrants and implementing a new system. eGrants is still our system until further notification. So we are asking that VADs be submitted at the time of the continuation application. This is a great time to update your VADs. Again, VADs are submitted and created outside of eGrants, so there's not a specific place in eGrants for you to put those, but you'll want to make sure that those are created and submitted outside of eGrants. The NOFA that you guys are applying for is the FY19 AmeriCorps VISTA State. That is your NOFA. Your grant number will not change, so if you have a FY or an 18 VSNIA 003 grant number, that number does not change, but your application ID does. So your grant number stays solid for your 3 years of your grant, and then each time you make an amendment or each time you do a continuation, your application ID will change. So it's just to track kind of what we've done to the grants and eGrants. So just be aware of that. Your type varies by sponsor, so the type of project that you guys select, but typically it's a standard with cost share. Page 28 of the application instructions that you guys have printed off walks you through the project renewals and continuations. I do encourage you to take a few minutes just to familiarize yourself with that, but also the full VISTA application instructions, not just the continuation request section. We want to make sure that folks are including everything that needs to be included in the application and kind of taking fresh eyes to the application each year. So just be aware of that. There is a specific section for project continuations and renewals, but it basically says update as needed. And so you're like, what's supposed to be in here? That's going to be back in the full application instructions. And we'll go through that in a little bit. One VAD should be submitted per position. So if you have 3 VISTA members all working on different things, you're going to want to make sure that each one of those members has a different VAD. If you have 2 members working on the same thing, you can have 1 VAD for that unless they have different varying degrees of how they do things. So just be aware of those aspects of the continuation application. So basically the continuation application is going to consist of your continuation in e-grants, creating your VADs, and then updating some of your attachments. And we'll kind of walk through each of those steps as we go through this. So here on the next slide, on slide 11, these are the links where you'll find the full application instructions, the FY19 program guidance, and then also a link to our VISTA sponsor page through the nationalservice.gov. So nationalservice.gov got a facelift, I'd like to call it, this past summer. So if you haven't been on it in a while, it's going to look a little different from how it might have looked in years past. And so we just want to make sure that folks are aware that everything is out on the nationalservice.gov website, and these are the links where to find them. I'm a big believer in I don't have to know everything, I just have to know where to find it, and so I try to provide you guys as much information as possible as to where to reference things at. So just a few quick tips for your continuation application and using eGrants. So save your narratives outside of eGrants in a word processing document. eGrants is a fantastic system. We've come a long way. We still have a long ways to go. She can be temperamental, and so she has some quirks to her if you haven't worked in eGrants a lot, but make sure that you're saving any of your information outside of eGrants. eGrants also does not have a word spell check on it, and so just be aware of that. eGrants operates best in Microsoft Explorer as your browser. If you're using Firefox or Chrome, she's not going to open and operate as smoothly. So if you do run into a few issues, just make sure you have opened eGrants in Microsoft Explorer. You do want to make sure your pop-up blockers are turned off. eGrants is basically a series of pop-ups. So if you click from one section to a next, if you're going from the narratives to the budget, it's going to bring a pop-up window. And so if your pop-up blocker is on, you're not going to see anything. You're going to call me, and that's going to be the first thing I'm going to tell you to do. And so just make sure that your pop-up blockers are off. You do want to save often while working in eGrants. She does not automatically save for you, so you're going to want to make sure that you do that. One of the things when you get into eGrants, I don't have a screenshot right here, but the save is actually on the left-hand side where the next is on the right-hand side of the screen. I did not design this, but I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of that as you're kind of looking at your screens and inputting stuff. Make sure that you save often. If you haven't been working, she'll log you off automatically. If you guys have worked in eGrants at all, you know that if you get logged off after so many minutes of no activity in there. So make sure that you're saving often, because if you get distracted by a phone call or someone walking into your office, it's really easy to kind of lose where you're at. I do encourage you guys to read the instructions. This is one of the things that a lot of people just kind of think they know what they're supposed to put in there, and so they do, but make sure you read the instructions carefully to guide you through the process. I do encourage you to read and review your grant prior to submitting it. You can actually create a PDF of it prior to submitting it. And read it as we would read it. So that's how we look at it, and making sure it makes sense. The other key piece here is make sure that the authorizing person who is submitting the grant has the authority to accept federal funds for your agency. So a lot of times our designated point of contact or our project director or the coordinators for our projects are not authorized by their grantees to actually accept federal funds for their agency. And so a lot of times it's your executive director, your board, your chair of your board, or someone above the project director do accept the funds. Sometimes it's the same person, but a lot of times there are two different people there. So you do want to make sure that the person who is authorizing and submitting does have that authority, and making sure that they have an active eGrants account, because they cannot do it from your account. Just because they do click the buttons, they still have to have their own account, because eGrants will not recognize it any other way. So those are just some quick tips for working in eGrants, and making sure that folks are kind of know what they're getting into as they set it up. So any questions before we dive into the application itself? All right, so your application does consist of the following components that are outlined on page or on slide 13. Excuse me. We're kind of going to go through each of these sections very quickly. If you have printed a copy of the project application instructions, I encourage you to pull those out at this time, as we'll kind of go through those, and I'll pull out certain pages that you might want to reference as you go through these. So to begin your VISTA application instruction, or to begin your VISTA application, you're going to log into eGrants account. Before you start, once logged in, you'll see under View All Grant Applications that you have one grant edit of application in this status. So and basically that's going to be pulling forward. Once you create that continuation, that's where you're going to see it, is that one grantee edit of application. You can get in and out of this application as often as possible, but do save your work and make sure that you create that continuation. Don't try to amend your current grant, but actually create a continuation for it. So we will be walking through that. For those of you who had applied for summer associate programming, that is a different process of how to add that information, and so we're going to kind of skip that. In the application instructions, you'll see that information referenced, and so I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that summer associates was an application, outside application process. So on page 5 and 6, you're going to see the criteria for sponsorship and approval considerations. These are things just to take into consideration, that we take into consideration when reviewing applications. So again, page 5 and 6 of the application are the criteria for sponsorship and approval considerations that I want folks to make sure that they're reviewing. In the applicant information, so I've moved on to slide 14. In the applicant information, this talks about your DUNS number and your SAM registry. And so we want to make sure that folks are doing that. This is actually found on page 7 of the application information. Things to note here is that you want to confirm your EIN and your DUNS number are correct. Your SAM is basically a CCR registration, a central contractor registry for the federal government. As of October 1st, CNCS cannot make awards with organizations that are not in SAM or that have expired registrations. So you'll want to make sure that you go into there. And if you receive federal funds from anywhere else, you likely have a SAM account, and you have your SAM is updated. SAM.gov is the portal that you go to, and it is free. You will sometimes find folks who are like, oh, we'll do your SAM registration for you for $500. There's no reason for that. It actually is a free registration, so just make sure that you are aware of that. So all this information on the applicant tab will pull forward, and so we just want to make sure that you guys have that information and it is correct. The application information, so there's applicant and then there's application information. The application information is your proposed project dates. So you want to check your memorandum of agreement dates, and you're going to start this application the day after your MA ends. And so if your memorandum of agreement ends on May 23rd, this one will start on May 24th. The application is not subject to the Executive Order 12372, so people always ask that question. And you do want to indicate your type of organization and if your organization is delinquent on any federal debt. Again, your type of project, varies from program to program a little bit, but most of you are standards with a cost share, and when you do your cost share, you're going to check that box. So page 7 again of the application instructions does go over this. If you do choose the wrong type or you fail to check the cost share box, this will affect how your budget section of the application is created. So just be aware of that. If you get into your budget and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I can't put anything in this line, it's likely because that box, that checked box, didn't happen in the cost share section on the application information. So just want to make sure that folks are aware of those pieces. For the most part, all of this information should pull forward. This is also the place where you'll likely update kind of who your point of contact is, just making sure all of that information is correct. So these are kind of a quick overview, but just so you guys know what you're looking for in those 2 tabs. The narratives can be found on page 8 through 12 of the application instructions. Again, the narratives, all this information rolls forward, and you're going to update this as appropriate. So read through it, make sure it still makes sense, make sure it's still kind of where it needs to be, make sure that all of your community partners that you've noted in the application are still your community partners for the next year. I will say if you're using a word processing system, avoid special formatting or tables. eGrants does not accommodate them, so don't try to put any tables in there because when you put it into eGrants, you're not going to see it. There is a character count limit. I don't know exactly what that is because no one can really tell me, but we have hit it before with applications. So it says that there's no length restriction. It's a pretty long length restriction, but you do want to try to be as concise as possible because of that. So don't give me a 42-page application. There's no reason for that if you can do it in 10. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. This is just a tip. You're going to enter the narrative responses and work plans in a word processing first and then cut and paste. You'll want to type both the question and the answer in the narrative sections. That kind of helps reviewers be able to pull those things out. And then include activities for the entire project period for which you're requesting resources. So if you're moving into year 2 and you're like, in this year, this is what we're going to do. This was our success last year or what we're predicting our success because at the end of your current year. And then next year we're going to do this and how we're going to expand upon that. So those are some questions that you'll find in the narratives, and making sure that you are clearly articulating that is helpful. So the narratives do have different sections. The instructions for these are found as outlined here on this slide. But on slide 17, you're going to see just the different narratives. I'm not going to go through each one of these because I think our instructions are pretty clear as to what we're asking in each of them. But I do encourage folks to look at page 9 through basically page 13 of the application instructions, really pull out the narratives. Your summary of accomplishments, you definitely want to fill out for those of you rolling into year 2 or 3 of your grant application. That's definitely something you're going to want to make sure that you're updating. Your need should not really change too much from year to year if that's the need that your focus was on. If that is changing or you're changing a priority focus area, please let us know. That's something that we'd want to know and discuss with you ahead of time. Your project management, again, make sure those are updated. VISTA assignments, make sure those are updated. Your recruitment and development planning, review those. If those seem good, you should be good to go. And the other section is there shouldn't be much in there unless you're applying for summer associate programming or there was special consideration for you to input in that section. So the other section should be blank. But those are just some tips and tools for the narratives. On page 12 for the executive summary, there's a template provided for what the executive summary should look like. So most of you already have one in your applications, but I just wanted to let you know, for those of you who, again, are new to this and you're wondering where that came from, there is actually a little template that CNCS provides as to kind of how that should look. So making sure that that is there. So any questions about the narratives or anything we've talked about so far? I know I'm rolling through this quickly, but I just want to make sure we're staying on time and conscious of your time. So any questions yet so far? Again, all of your lines are open, so you can talk or you can type into the text. Kaylee, so the executive summary template is within the applications. Yes. So it's just like 3 sentences, Kaylee. It's on page 12 of the application instructions. I'm sorry, it's 4 to 6 sentences. So it'll tell you kind of what it should be in there. So what you should include in that section. Awesome. Any other questions? All right. On page 13 of your application instructions, it's gonna talk about your sites. And so in the site section, you will list the various sites you will either be receiving one or more VISTA members or leaders, or that will benefit from capacity building efforts of our members. So if there are no other sites than your own, just click add a new site and list your organization. If it's just within your own organization, you have you guys, that's what you're going to do. If you're working with multiple partners, which I know a few of you are, those sites might be changing. And so you want to make sure that you keep your current sites in there. So if you have a member currently serving with someone, make sure you keep it in there. But then you'll add new sites for the coming year. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. The information you will need to complete this section is the name of the organization, the supervisor's phone number and name, their physical address. And the thing that always kind of throws people is you do need their EIN number. The reason for this is we do want to make sure that they are a nonprofit organization where our members are being placed. And so that is something that they look at when they review the applications, just to make sure that they are an actual organization, number one, and that they are kind of a nonprofit. So we do want to make sure that that is included in there. On the site tab, you're also going to indicate the performance measurement site or a member placement site or both. I would say 9 times out of 10, our sites are both. It's where the member is serving, and it's also the site that is benefiting from the member. Very rarely do we see a member physically sitting somewhere but benefiting a different site. It does happen every once in a while, but for the most part, there's going to be both for most of you. Now that might be different for a few, but I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware. The one thing that I do want to point out here is that your VISTA Memorandum of Agreement does not align with where your VISTA members start and end. And so when I say make sure you keep your sites that are currently serving in there is because your M of A ends in May. Your members likely don't end until August. June, July, August, those are our big recruitment years or recruitment months. And so your M of A kind of overlaps with that. I know it's not clean and it's not real concise, but that's kind of how we do it because the MA has to be put into place for you to be able to recruit and place members before they start. And so we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. Please make sure you account for those members that are currently serving in the sites, for the sites and for the performance measurements moving forward. So sometimes our programs name them as the 2018-2019 sites, the 2019-2020 sites, so it's the 18-19 Boys and Girls Club, the 19-20 Boys and Girls Club. So they kind of know which site is which site. The sites that you put in here you will then need to do performance measurements for each of those. And so that kind of then creates how the performance measurements are pulled. So just be aware of that as you move forward. So any questions about sites before we move into performance measurements? So for FY19, you're going to see some changes with our performance measurements. CNCS looked at our performance measurements across all programs, and they have tried to streamline those a little bit. So there's going to be there's no difference in how the performance measurements are done, but there is a difference on kind of the wording of them. And so you'll want to make sure that you are looking at that. Projects generally have 2 main conceptual components. 1 is to build capacity, and 2 is to help individuals and communities out of poverty. So the performance measure model in eGrants contains 2 screens. for you to enter information in for each of those conceptual components. So the first is your performance measurement screen, where you're going to describe how your VISTA resources will build capacity for your program and your organization. And the second is the anti-poverty screens, where you're going to describe how the organization or program will help individuals and communities out of poverty. So this is, for those of you who haven't been in the performance measurements, this can look a little intimidating and a little weird because of these two different components, and then there's two different screens for them, but they do build upon each other. If you haven't, I do encourage you to look over the FY19 performance measures. There is a link to them on slide 19 through our nationalservice.gov website. In addition, there are some online tutorials available to you if you haven't worked with our performance measures before. There are some tutorials out there for you to look over and become familiar with kind of how the performance measurements for CNCS work and how we look at them overall. The one thing I will say is we do have defining definitions of things, and so if you're like, oh, I think this is what will work, make sure you look at how we define certain aspects of those words. So, excuse me. There are a few things that while we think they mean the same thing, they don't. One of the big ones that I can think of is managing volunteers and recruiting volunteers. There's actually two separate definitions for those two things, and so they should be tracked separately and not the same. And so when folks get into the reporting, they're like, oh, we recruited 340 members and we managed 340 members, and then we think you've worked with over 600 people, and you're like, no, we only worked with 300. And so they have defining definitions of those things. So just make sure you're familiarizing yourself with the performance measures. The performance measurements are how you're basically going to build, and we're going to gauge how your program is doing. And so this is how you're setting that up. Page 13 through 22 of the application instructions kind of go through this, and we want to make sure that folks are aware of that. You will navigate through screens and enter information. A lot of stuff is from drop-down information, and this is going to basically be the basis for your future reporting and your progress reports. So we encourage you again to watch those online tutorials and familiarize yourself with those. The performance measurement screen, on this screen is where you're going to enter information about capacity building aspects for each of your proposed project sites. So you told me which sites you're going to be serving at. Now you're going to build performance measurements for each of those sites. Each site that will benefit directly from the capacity building efforts of VISTA will provide information about the capacity building goal, the number of VISTAs, and at least one output and at least one outcome. A lot of times people want to put like 22 outputs and 22 outcomes. Try to keep it simple. So you have to have at least one. We encourage about 3 per site. If you want to go crazy, you don't really need more than that, unless you're having all your members serve at the same site and you have 20 members and you have one output. We might question that a little bit if they're doing 5 different things. So just be aware of kind of how your project is designed. You'll also provide information about data collection plans and how you plan to collect that data. So we do want to look at, it's not just, oh yeah, we think we did that, but what actually is the data that will support what you're proposing in your performance measurements. For the applicant requesting leaders, a few of you have leaders on your project. This is typically for our bigger programs who have around 8 members or more. You may either include information about the leader in a performance measure set with other VISTA members, or you can create a separate performance measurement set for your leaders under your site at your own organization. So just be aware of that. Leaders can again be rolled in or be separate. So again, summer associate stuff is mentioned in these application instructions through page 14 through 19, but we want to make sure that that's a separate process. So for those of you who are going after summer associate programming, that is a separate process for this, and we'll be back to you on that. Again, make sure you're hitting the save button before you move to next on these screens. Hit save before you move to next. Again, left and right hand sides of the screens can get confusing. I didn't design it. So performance measurements. This is really, you're going to select a capacity building goal from the list. You're going to select whether you're scale and reach, effectiveness, efficiency, or leveraging. So capacity building, that's kind of how we do that, is activities that may expand services, enhance delivery of services, or generate additional resources. And these activities leave a lasting positive outcome on the beneficiaries or the population served by CNCS. So capacity building goals of scale and reach, effectiveness, efficiency, and leverage resources are defined in the application instructions on page 15. And so we want to make sure that you guys are looking at those and defining those within that measure. Performance measurements, again, you're going to select some service activities. On page 15 through 17, you're going to see a list of service activities that you can select from. And so those are just kind of drop-down menus. The one thing that is highlighted here in red is that in the text box next to the service activity category, you're going to briefly describe the VISTA activities. So if it says volunteer recruitment, you're going to tell me what you mean by volunteer recruitment. And so those are things that's something that people often miss when they're creating their performance measurements, is they select the activity, but they never provide the description. So make sure that you are looking at that as you kind of roll through things. Again, I'm going to go through these quickly. You guys have the PowerPoint, and if you guys have questions, please set up a time with your program officer. But selecting outputs and outcomes, at least one. You will collect and report on the data from the output and outcome that you've selected, and you may select more than one. Again, don't be doing 22 per each site. I'm gonna think you're crazy, because then you have to report out on each of those. But around 3 to 5 per site is good, depending on how many members are there. Performance measurements, enter data collection information. This is outlined on page 18 through 19 of the application instructions. This is when you're going to select a method for collecting the data from a drop-down menu. Again, entering the instrument description. So this is something that folks often miss. You're going to add your target numbers as to what you expect to reach for the project period, so the end of the year. And then the unit of measure will automatically appear as you select your outputs and outcomes from the list. So again, if you guys have questions for this, let us know. This is also gonna ask you how many VISTAs are tied to that performance measurement. So this is kind of just walks you through the steps to build off of them. So your performance measurement screens, once you're done with those, you're going to then move to your anti-poverty screens. And so you're going to add anti-poverty information. Again, this will all pull forward from the previous application. So if your sites are changing, you're going to want to add new sites. If your goals need to be updated, again, you want to update that information for the 2019-2020 project year. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that stuff. The anti-poverty screen is you're going to enter information about the organization or program helps individuals and communities out of poverty. Enter only the anti-poverty programming aspects that specifically relate to the project site. And you will identify an anti-poverty output and an outcome and a program strategy or intervention. You will also enter the number of VISTA members you are requesting related to each of these anti-programming areas, and enter information about the data collection plans is optional. So if you're planning on, hey, our goal because of these capacity building measures is to do these things, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to be collecting that data quite yet, you can leave that blank and not have to report out on that. So we would just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. That is something that is optional. Again, page 19 through 22 of the application instructions will walk you through that. On page 26, or slide 26, I guess I should say, not page, slide 26 of the PowerPoint, you're going to see kind of the anti-poverty screens, and what this does is just walks you through it in a bulleted format, and letting you know kind of what information to enter. So again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if you have questions about this, please let us know. When you have entered the information for all the anti-poverty programming areas related, you're going to click Done Adding Anti-Poverty Programming, and this will return you to the performance measurement screens where you can add additional information for those things. So we just wanted to make sure folks are aware of that. We got about 10 minutes left, and so I'm going to roll to budget unless anybody has any questions quickly. All right, so budget. Again, for most of you, it's the standard budget. All VISTA projects, regardless of their type, must complete a budget and include a written narrative justification for the line items. There are no specific match requirements for the budget, so you don't have to have 30% match or 20% match. The budget documents and the type and the level of resources the sponsor will provide. So you do have to provide us some information on the budget. They can be pretty basic, but they don't have to be every little detail. That's the beauty of the VISTA project. There are several lines that will be estimated, for example, the education award and the cash and award cash stipend, because these depend on the choice of the VISTA member or the leader. I would say if you're estimating, just throw them under, if you're for that specific, for the end of service award, I would put those under the education award, just because 90% of our members do take the education award, and this again is a guesstimate, so I would put them under there. If you have 4 members serving, have all 4 of them take the education award, just to be simple. Unless you know that one will be, unless you think that you're going to be recruiting someone or going after people who might like the cash stipend instead. So just be aware of that. eGrants will create the budget and the budget narrative automatically from the detailed budget information you've entered. So once you've entered your budget information in eGrants, you'll be asked to validate your budget, and eGrants will check your submission for errors. Also, use whole dollars, no cents. They don't really like that, so just be aware of that. So we want to make sure that something that will pop up. So when you go to validate this, the education award amount may not be accurate, and you may get an error that says your education award is not accurate. You can still validate your budget. Unfortunately, the tech guys haven't gotten that bug worked out. I think it's been there for a couple years now. But just be aware of that you may get an error when you go to validate that the education award amount is not reflective of the correct amount. The correct amount is $6,095. But the system hasn't quite updated to that yet. So just be aware of that. You can still validate, you can still submit, but it's going to just give you a pop-up. So something to be aware of. These next slides really walk you through section 1 and section 2 of the budget. These are on slide 28, and the budget instructions themselves are actually not in the application instructions. So these are actually instructions outside of the application instructions that you guys will get. You have links to already, but they're on the nationalservice.gov, and I'll be sending them again. So we just want to make sure that this is kind of what is expected in each of those sections and how to move forward. So again, I am running out of time, so I'm going to move to the next slide. On slide 29, basically the following information is accurate to date. You're not going to find this information in your budget application instructions because it varies from state to state. So for Iowa, our living allowance is $12,311 per year. Our leaders make $14,713. The education award is $6,095. And the cash stipend is $1,800. Leader stipend is $3,000. So this is something that's very specific to Iowa. This is on when we did the recruitment webinar in January. This is kind of part, this is stuff that's coming up for this year. So just be aware of that as you do this. The next slide that you're going to see is actually just a screenshot of the budget. And so I do want to run through this really quickly. So on slide 30, you're going to see kind of section 1, section 2, and then there's different columns. And so the total obviously is the total amount for the line, but then you're going to see CNCS share, grantee share, and member support. And so this confuses folks. And so I want to walk through it very quickly. CNCS share is basically if you are receiving federal funds directly from us. Very few of you do. So unless you have a S&T grant or an operational grant, so a support grant or a program grant, you're not going to fill in anything in CNCS share. So we never, a lot of times, not never, but 90% of the times we don't actually give you funding. So this column will be left blank for the majority of you. Now, if you receive an S&T grant, this is where you're going to fill in what the S&T grant is used for. The grantee share is your share. That's what you guys are providing for the grant. And so this is the grantee share is the project share. Member support is basically resources that CNCS provides, but it goes directly to the member. So the living allowance, the education award, the health benefits, those are all reflected under member support. So that is where it gets a little confusing because people are like, oh, well, CNCS is providing the living allowance for 3 of our 4 members, so we put it under CNCS share. You technically don't. You put it under member support share. So again, CNCS share is if we are physically giving you $20,000, or member support is when we give you funding, but it goes directly to the member. So the living allowance, the education award, and the insurance. You're also going to see under section 2, there's going to be living allowances for full-time federal and full-time non-federal. The full-time federal amounts, again, those are going to go under member support. Federal means that we are providing the living allowance for that member. The full-time non-federal is basically your cost share. For those of you who are cost sharing a member, which all of you should be, that's where you're going to put the cost share amount, and that will go under grantee share because you are providing that to the grant. Education award, again, all of that should go under member support along with stipend, and then the health insurance, again, should go all under member support. So I just want to make sure those are a few things that throw people off a little bit, and I wanted to point that out of the budget. So any questions about the budget before I quickly move through documents and then from there? So any questions about the budget? Again, instructions are out there and should be pretty thorough. So for the continuation in year 2 and 3 for your documents, page 26 of the application instructions talks about this, but really you've submitted a lot of stuff already. So you want to make sure that if there's any changes, those need to be resubmitted. So on slide 37, it kind of outlines this. So really letters of support and the VADs, those have to be updated annually. Everything else, unless there's been changes to them, they don't need to be resubmitted. So your articles of incorporation, your list of board of directors, your org chart, a copy of the supervisor's resume and job description. If that has changed, please resubmit it. So if you're new and you have there's a new job description for how you work under your organization, please submit that stuff. Other than that, it does not need to be resubmitted because we should already have it on file. After you've submitted the documents, I guess I should say, the documents cannot be submitted through eGrants. This is another trick of eGrants. You do have to send those directly into CNCS. I do encourage you to send those to our ia@cns.gov email address. Again, that's the abbreviation for Iowa, ia@cns.gov. That's actually the office email, and so it goes to both Vicki, well, actually it's its own separate email, but Vicki and I have access to it, and so that is the best way to submit documentation. After you have compiled these informations and as you're going through your application, you are going to see an eGrants either not sent or not applicable. Most things will either be sent already or not applicable. If you put not sent, that's actually going to throw up an error message as to why it wasn't not sent, and that can be just like kind of a cross-reference for you as you guys go through stuff. So just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. I see Kylie is typing a message. Could you repeat which documents you want us to send directly to CNCS? I missed what you said. So on slide 32 of that PowerPoint that I sent you, the letters of support and the VADs are the two things that need to be updated for year 2 and 3 of a continuation and beyond. If anything else, if any of the other documents listed there that need to be updated, those need to be resubmitted. But if they don't need to be updated, you don't have to resubmit them. Hopefully that's what, and to IA, the ia@cns.gov is the email address. So Carly says within eGrants, I do not see where we access the continuation application. Carly, so if you go to your current grant, you should be able to create an application from the continuation application from there. I'll send you all a cheat sheet about how to do that. I don't have a screenshot for it right now, but you actually have to create it first from your current grant. So under awarded, yeah, yep, on that side. All right. And finally, review, authorize, and submit. Again, you're going to go back through, look at the sections, make sure everything's good to go. And again, the authorized representative should be able to accept federal funds from your organization. We're at the top of the hour, and so if you guys do have questions, I will stay on for a little bit longer. The slide deck that I sent you does provide a little bit more information. In addition, there is also some VISTA assignment descriptions or VAD resources available that you guys can check out for creating your VADs. And the resources, if you have issues with like the National Service Hotline, how to get a hold of those. There's also budget instruction links at the end on slide 36 as well. So just wanted to make sure that folks have access to those things. So if you guys do have questions, please let me know. I'll stay on for a few minutes, but I know we're at the top of the hour and I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining today, and this does conclude the call. I'm going to turn off the